I want to mention first that these 5 blunders that I drew from did not come from what I would call realism blunders. And the realism blunders are a bit separate. And there's different kinds. There's climate logic errors, terrain and geography mistakes, world building logic problems. So there's a whole series of problems that come with realism. I did not draw any of these 5 blunders from these. This could be an entire stream series in which we follow more realistic biome development. That sounds like a great stream. We will not be covering that here, but there is quite a few to pull from and a lot more. These are the ones that I found the most prominent online, but they list from, extreme biomes where you have a tropical one touching a tundra or deserts without rain shadows, an equatorial tundra, like a tundra that would be right on the equator. There's all these kind of realism blunders that exist. And I think none of these are applicable if you're not using, Earth type physics, because all of these realism blunders come from Earth physics. So if you're not creating a world based on Earth physics, you can just ignore all of these blunders altogether. It doesn't matter. All right, let's go over into the biome blunders. And the way that I came about these results was going through our social media, whether it was Reddit or Instagram or wherever online, where people's profiles, which was a lot of maps. But I went through and kind of looked for new users and looked at their maps to see what were the most kind of common repeating mistakes or blunders that I kind of saw that they were doing. And then I kind of wrote those down, and that's kind of how I came about much of these blunders. So if you also feel like there are other blunders as well that I might have missed, or you also see when you're skimming through the Explore page or you're going through someone's profile, feel free to also throw those in the chat, because I want to know what you think also constitute as a blunder. And on a final note, again, these are subjective. These are my opinions and they're not facts. So if you disagree with them, totally understandable. And feel free to share why you might disagree, because I want to hear it. All right, let's jump into it. So the first one is going to be the stamp spamming. And stamp spamming is when you basically go into the stamp tool right here and you pick a forest as a great example of where stamp spamming happens the most. But if you go click a tree in the catalog of your choice and you scroll down, just take your mouse scroll wheel and just scroll down to the bottom here, and you'll see something right here that says more options. Go down to the bottom and you're going to see this thing right here called area and density. If you bring the area up, you'll notice the cursor on the number 4, next to the number 4 there. It creates a denser area in which you can kind of place trees. So if I kind of put this here, you'll kind of notice it places a bunch of trees. So that's very, very, very helpful. But there comes a problem with tree spamming when you do it. Like if you're making trees or even mountains or whatever you're spamming, is it creates a kind of monotonous look where everything is very repetitive. And so I see a lot of these with people's maps. They're smart to use the area and the density brush. You should use those. Those allow you to create larger forests. But if you just stop there with just spamming the large forests, your forests look very plain, and there's no real variety, where nature actually favors variety and diversity for survival purposes. So, well, there are a couple things that we can do to make our forest not look so stamp spammy. And the way that I go about doing that, hey, first time chatter, by the way, the way that I go about avoiding stamp spamming is if you already have a map open and you have the spam, that's okay. The way that you can, there are a couple routes that you could take to fix this. Well, one, you could just select one tree, go to the hamburger menu here, and just go select all stamps like this. And that means the one that you selected, that particular stamp in the set. If you wanted to select everything in the set, then you would go to that bottom option, all stamps within the set. Don't do that. Go to all stamps like this, and it will select every single stamp like that within that stamp set there. And what I can do is I can change some settings to make it look like there's some variety. For instance, I can bring the brightness down. This already creates a little bit of variety with my trees. Or I can do the opposite. I can bring the brightness up a little bit, change it that way. Or if I want, I can change it to a different hue of green. Maybe I want it to be more bluish, maybe more on the reddish or brownish side. So you can change these color tweak options. Again, they're found right here where it says tweak colors. And then you can change any of these 4 settings here that makes a huge difference, because again, stamp spamming kind of just looks like it's a low effort. And it's understandable if that's your first step, it's your first time, that's okay. But if you've got more experience with the tool, you should step above stamp spamming and try to change some diversity with your stamps. Now, there are other options too. While you have all of those selected, if you go to your select option, there's this thing called replace asset. If I just click that and then go into the catalog, I can replace it with a stamp of my choice. And so you can just pick one. Now, there is something important you should know when you use this replace thing right here. And that is that if you just click on a stamp set, its thumbnail image right here, what will happen is it will replace a whole bunch of random stamps within that set. But if you want to replace a specific stamp within a set, you have to show the whole set and then select the individual one. Otherwise, it's going to do it randomly. So let me just pick a random one right here, common green tree, and you'll notice that it immediately replaces those stamps with that different tree. And that's also very helpful. Tree diversity is helpful. You don't have to change the settings of a bunch of stamps. You could just select a bunch and then replace them with a different type of tree, or you can do the other way, right? Which is to change the settings. That is up to you and how you want to go about doing it, okay? So I find this very, very helpful. So again, try to avoid stamp spamming if you can, and if you do, don't forget to take the next step after the spam, because the spamming is meant to create the volume, the area that is the forest or whatever stamp you're trying to fill. It's then once you've created the volume, the area, then you can go in and fine tweak individual things within the trees, and whether it's the hue, saturation, those things, or if you just want to replace them entirely with a different stamp set, that's up to you. So it's an easy fix. If you have some stamp spamming, just go do some minor edits. It doesn't take very long, especially with options like select all like this. And then you can do that to multiple trees, and then you can have multiple types. So that's really quite helpful if you want to avoid that stamp spamming there. Let's go into the next one, which I see quite often. And this is one that I see a lot. It's flat biomes. And this is pretty common because there's no way to do like a height map. There isn't a way to show elevation, and mountains are the most dramatic height change. But what about in between? What about in between peak, the top of a mountain, and then those smaller elevations, mid-range elevations that kind of aren't as tall as a mountain, but they're not exactly at sea level? How is it that we do that? And there's a couple ways to approach flat biomes. And one of them is a little bit more labor intensive, and the other one is quite easy. So the more labor intensive one is to add cliffs. And what the great places to add cliffs, and I've harped on this in other videos before, the best place to do that is at the base of mountains where you see the line work here. So you see that there's the line work of this mountain right here. You can take these stamps right here and line them up. I'll go into number 4 here, and I can go like this and just kind of place stamps along there. Now, the beautiful thing about it is that you don't have to do every single one. If you just want to have certain areas that have the cliffs and others don't, that's okay. So you just have a little bit of cliffs here. You could take it to the next level. What happens if I wanted to show elevation going down to sea level, right? Sea level means where the level of the sea is. Mountains, alpine, higher up. But you want to show some in between. So why don't we bump up the size of the cliffs so that they are noticeably bigger? Like this. I'll just make them slightly bigger. I'll go ahead and add these, reconnect them to where they want to be here. That looks good, like that. And then what you can do here is you can create a series of canyons and other unique shapes by bringing the scale down just a little bit. You can create a little canyon right here. We can do another piece right here like this. So here's this canyon right here. Maybe a river goes through this canyon and goes out to the ocean here. And what this will do is it automatically starts to create this elevation change. And then when you get to the ocean, you don't have to have any cliffs at all, but you can make the cliffs really small or really big, up to you, and just kind of place it like this. And if the elevation is going lower and lower, closer and closer to sea level, then begin to taper the size, change the size of the stamps the closer you get to the ocean to show the elevation change, right? Because these cliffs are smaller, it's a smaller rock shelf, and it's closest to the ocean, right? So to show this elevation change, you can start with large cliffs at the base of your mountains, and then the further and further away you get from the mountains, bring the elevation down by changing and varying the size of the cliffs. This way you kind of have a more unique elevation changes. Just note that the cliffs are slightly more time consuming because you have to place them individually, but you don't have to do it on every single mountain range, which is nice. You can decide which mountain ranges will have the cliffs and which ones won't. I mean, and this is going to be helpful because if every mountain range has cliffs, then all the mountain ranges are going to look the same. But if you have some mountain ranges with cliffs and some without, it will make them more unique. So I'm going to put down a couple more cliffs just to give this a little bit more unique shapes, and then we'll go over the next step, the other thing that you can do to make a little bit more elevation in your maps, because sometimes you don't want to do all the cliffs. That's okay. You don't have to do all the cliff work. There's another way using textures or contrast, which works just as well, and that's up to you. So let's see here. I think that looks good. I'm going to add in maybe just a couple cliffs along here like this, just a little bit smaller ones along here. Let's do that. Let's add another one right here like this. That looks good. I'm just going to add a couple more. That looks good. Let's maybe tie this one up like this. There we go. That looks better. There we go. Okay. So we have, you say you don't want to do cliffs, but you do want to show some kind of elevation change that's more subtle than a cliff, because a cliff is a very obvious elevation change, right? There's a drop. But what happens if you want to show something like a hill or something that's a gradual transition from a high point to a low point? Then you're going to use contrast. I say this one quite a bit, but if you want to show lower regions and higher regions, you're going to use darker textures for lower region and brighter textures for higher region. So in other words, it looks like this. You'll notice that I used this green texture right here. Let me go ahead and paint it on so you can kind of see that I've used it. So I'm painting this green texture here. What happens if I want to show that this region right here is lower than this part right here? Then I would do this. I would go over to my tweak colors option, bring the brightness down a little bit. Let's go to about 79 here. And I'll bring the opacity down a little bit. And I'll go ahead and just paint this section right here a kind of a darker green along these edges here. I'll put like kind of a darker green along here. Just put a darker green here. And to even show more elevation, we'll put a darker green here and green there. Right? So using contrast to show lighter or darker or deeper regions is very, very helpful. You can do that. And then you could do the opposite as well. Take a brighter variation of that texture, and where you wanted to show brighter regions, paint that brighter texture wherever you want it to be higher up. And then that represents a higher elevation. So using contrast is another way that you can create depth without having to use cliffs. So very, very helpful. So you can see that there is a difference in height here. This darker green is lower, while that brighter green is clearly higher up. Two tricks, one more time consuming, but yields great results when you use cliffs, and one's a bit easier. You'd make two variations of one texture at its default setting, one brighter, one darker. Bring the opacity down a little bit, because transitions, subtle transitions require subtle brush strokes. So you don't want hard green against the dark green against a hard white or light green texture. You want to have a little bit of fade in between to create a subtle transition in a hill, okay? So it's kind of important to remember that. So flat biomes, not a hard fix. Cliffs, textures. There's your trick, okay? All right, let's go to number 3. Another super common one is cluttered deserts. Now, we've mentioned in a previous episode called Forest versus Deserts that deserts are actually quite difficult. They're more challenging to do because a desert is, as you guessed, deserted, right? There isn't much going on in it. And so when that happens, when you have less visually going on, the smallest change in the terrain, the smallest POI or the smallest terrain change sticks out. You'll notice that these high elevation rocks right here, they really pop out because I have all these very low rolling sand dunes right here. So in other words, it's more challenging to make a good aesthetically pleasing desert because you have to learn how to use negative space, which is about composition. And this is what I see a lot of deserts do is they'll just kind of, again, kind of a stamp spam approach to where they'll just put a whole bunch of sand dunes down. And that looks fine. But if you want to bump it up, there's another approach to go to it, and that is to have a little bit more control on where your dunes go so that you can, again, kind of create this illusion of composition, putting a focal point somewhere. So what I'll do is I'll go into the forest here or the desert here, and I'll probably just delete a lot of these smaller dunes, and I'll create some space in between these dunes. Like this, we'll create some space here. That seems so close. I'm just going to create some space because it's so cluttered. And then once you start cleaning up some of the negative space here, so let's go and delete that. We'll put that there. You start cleaning it up a little bit. Things start to look a little bit more organized. Let's go ahead and move that one here like this. I want to show more flat negative space. Remember, the idea is a desert is deserted. It doesn't look so deserted when it's filled with a bunch of dune stamps, right? So breaking up these, kind of creating maybe some connecting lines with each other. Let's move this one. This one looks a lot of the same. Let's move them this way. Yeah, exactly. I agree with the musical rogue there in the chat. Negative space is important. And when negative space or empty space, because empty space is what causes the focal point to change, right? It also is a rest for your viewer's eye, right? If there's always constantly something going on, then there's no place for the eye to rest. So having those contrasting negative spaces or empty spaces helps to make the more populated spaces pop out, right? It's a contrasting thing. Remember, one of the big iron rules that I have is contrast is king or queen. It is the way to go. Contrast is how you make eye-popping biomes. So always kind of remember that. But what's helpful is to space out your dunes a little bit more. Maybe you can create wave-like formations or lines, and then you see you have this negative space right in here like this, where there's nothing going on here. That creates a rest, and then the eye can move from the rest over to this next spot right here. So it's important when you think about deserts or even just a wasteland of some kind, always remember to focus on how is it that I'm creating a dichotomy between negative space and positive space, or occupied space and empty space, stamp space and texture space, right? So always kind of remember that. It's going to be very important when you're putting together deserts. And deserts, again, they are challenging for that reason. It requires more command of understanding of composition to make deserts, while conversely, a forest is much easier. You can do stamp spamming and it won't get in the way. So deserts, quite difficult, really, quite challenging. Let's go to number 2. And this one I see a lot. This one was hard. It contended with number 1, but it's the lack of biome blending. And this is, I get this question a lot too, is how do I blend 2 biomes together, right? I have this forest right here in this kind of brown painted region, and then I have this grassland next to it. But you notice that there's this hard brown line right here, and this seems pretty odd, right? There's no transition between the two, and that hard line looks weird, right? You would think that when a biome goes to another into another biome, there's a smooth texturing transition between the two. And it's not hard to do, especially with 2.0, because there are brand new brushes that we can use that are really, really helpful. Before, we would have to take one of the same texture and do all these little dots and jitters to try to diffuse this line right here. But now that we have this nice brush right here called Dirt, you don't have to do that so much anymore. So then that's quite helpful. But there is one trick. You can't just out of the box at 100% opacity just put this down and expect it to look good. As always, like a painter, many strokes before you can get a nice blend. So what you would instead do is drop it to 38 and then, or around 30, between 30 and 40, and then just go over it like this with a pen or a mouse and just lightly kind of go over it with that brown, with one of the base textures of your biome, like this. Just go ahead and like this. I'm going to use this, go in here, just kind of paint it in like this. There we go. Yeah, 33, 30, around there, the sweet spots. And you'll notice that this looking right here, it's kind of coming together. I also recommend making like patches like this, like make a patch of brown here, maybe a little patch of brown here, just to show that there's transition, right? Instead of just a hard line. So some brown patches here, here, go ahead and just kind of paint that in. And then you'll take that same green texture that you used for here, and you're going to take that green texture and then go into the other side and start creating some little patches here and there, diffuse that line. And by diffuse, I mean break up the line so it doesn't look like there's a line there. Maybe just do a couple strokes here and there, like this, maybe just a couple clicks here and there. And then you'll see that it starts to kind of come together, right? That hard line that was there has now disappeared. It's kind of blended into it. So this is always a best way, is to blend your biomes, is to know what the two base textures of your biomes are. The base texture for this prairie or this plain right here is vibrant green grass, while I used this brown desert right here for this one. Just remember those two, drop the opacity. You can favorite them if you need to, if you're doing a lot of texturing, and then just go back and forth between the two. Just do a couple passes, go up and around the line once, then go around the line again with the other texture, and it will go by pretty quickly. You saw how long that took, not very long. And this is zoomed in. Your biomes on your world map will probably be smaller, and so it won't be quite as time consuming to blend. So remember, use brushes to help you out, and there's a lot of really good brushers. Is the texture dropper released yet? I don't know yet. I don't think so, but I'll double check with the team. But the eyedropper is very, very helpful. Let me see if it's here. Let me double check. Oh, there's the eyedropper right here. But I don't know if it's released yet. I'll have to check the release notes, okay? But I do see it there. Like I can select here's your history right here, see? I don't know if everyone has this or not. Let me know in the chat if you have this who are not explorers. Let me know. If you don't, I'm just kind of showcasing it then. But very, very helpful. It kind of shows you all the textures that you use. Very, very helpful. Very, very useful. Champions and explorers have it. Right, exactly. Okay. Hasn't been released yet, but hey, some things to come, right? Exciting. So biome blending, no sweat. All it is just taking the base texture of whatever the biome that's the two biomes that are side by side, and just going with a couple passes around each one with the opposite biome base texture. So very, very helpful. And then finally, this is the one that I found the most, and this is the one that I do the most in my customer support, the ones that I see people who message me and ask me for help. And well, they don't ask me for help, but I'll notice this. This is usually my first critique. And that is that you're not blending stamps with base textures. Now, Inkarnate does a good job default by putting a clipping mask on the stamp. If you look carefully here, if I open this up, you'll notice that there's a clipping mask. So if I put this over in the green, you'll see that it has a clipping mask. So that's very helpful. That's a very good out-of-the-box step to blending your biome. So again, this is why it's a new user kind of issue, is because, you know, it come out of the box, it looks okay here. But in truth, there is another step that we can take besides just letting Inkarnate do some of the work for us with these clipping masks. And that is to say, well, I have these gray like mesas right here. Maybe I should apply a gray texture. And this is how I decide my biome, or how I do my texture blending or my stamp blending with textures, is I look at the primary color that I see, or the most dominant color in the stamp. And the most dominant color are grays, right? So that makes sense. So why don't then I take a gray texture of some kind, whichever one I want to use, this one or maybe this one, a gray texture. And then what I'll do is I'll paint that gray texture underneath the stamps to create a little bit more blend. So in other words, maybe there's some rocky ground at the base of these mesas here. That would make sense. We're going to use the dirt brush again. That's helpful. We'll bring the opacity down. And then with your either pen or mouse, just go ahead and paint a little bit of this gray texture just right underneath wherever you see that. You can make it a little bit bigger if you want to make the dots more prominent. Like you can see here, I can see more of the dots more prominently, but you can always do that. So I'll just go ahead and paint them in here like this. Wherever you see the little rocks too, just paint that in. I'll paint a little bit here, a little bit here. And then wherever you don't see rocks as well, it's okay to paint like a little line going like this way, a little line this way. And you can kind of create this illusion of using the texture that is the dominant color on the stamp and then blending it with whatever the dominant texture is on the ground, which is this orange. And this is the most common thing that I see people don't do, and it's okay if you don't. Out of the box, it's all right. But if you want to up your game, you definitely want to consider doing your blending with your stamps. This is going to be particularly helpful. So there's texturing. There is another option. You don't have to texture the base of every stamp. If you want to show a change in the ground, you can also use object shadows. I've mentioned this in a lot of streams, but maybe I want to make a object shadow where maybe the dirt underneath these trees is a darker brown. I can just go to select all from this set. I can go over to, let's see here, where is it? I want to go to shadow, go to custom object shadow. You're going to go into the shadow color here. And what we can do too, it might be helpful, is we can just change it to maybe a more orangish color. Maybe we can make a darker orangish color. Let's go ahead and change our blur. We'll bring our vertical offset down like this. Let's get a little bit more darker orange in here. And I'll bring the shadow blur down a little bit more. There we go. That looks a little better. That looks good. So I can create this. I can still paint underneath a stamp using a object shadow, which is quite helpful, I find. Because this way you don't have to end up taking a texture and painting underneath that. You can help to do it that way. You can do it with mountains. You can do it with trees. You can do it with just about any stamp that you can think of. But object shadows are one option that you can use to help your stamps blend in if you don't want to do texturing, because texturing is a little bit on the time-consuming part. Well, those are the 5 biome blunders that I came up with. Number 5, stamp spamming. 4, flat biomes. 3, cluttered deserts. 2, lack of biome blending. And finally, not blending stamps with base textures.